Tonight's session is We Need to Conserve Biodiversity, Improving Our Teaching Will Help with Dr. Suzanne Macy from the American Museum of Natural History. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll have Fact, Fiction, and the Gist, Helping Teens Navigate the World of AI with Allison Herman from Cornell. Um, and a month from tonight, we'll have Antarctica's View on Extreme Volcanism of the Past with Dr. Adrienne Lamb from Binghamton University, who's just returned from an expedition to Antarctica. Our Earth Day event will be Dr. Peter Bardaglio talking about power for the people, democracy, renewable energy, and civic action. And our final session of the spring will be Can Science and AI Predict Ecological Collapse with Dr. Ling-Wei Kong. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it off to Suzanne. So welcome, Suzanne. Thank you very much. And take it away.
Hi, well, thank you so much, Don, for that introduction, and I'm so glad to be here with you all this evening. My name is Suzanne Macy. I'm the Assistant Director for Capacity Development at the American Museum of Natural History's Center for Biodiversity and Conservation. As Don mentioned, my title is We Need to Conserve Biodiversity and Improving Our Teaching Will Help. And I want to just take a moment to have a little land acknowledgement. I'm here in New York City, and the American Museum of Natural History is located within the Lenapehoking, the ancestral land of the Lenape. We acknowledge and honor the present-day Lenape for their ongoing restorative relationship with their homeland and important contributions to the cultural life in the city of New York and the region. And I just want to give a little bit an overview of my talk. My title is sort of succinct and to the point, but my talk is a little bit more overarching. And I want to say that I framed it a little bit in the sense of who I am, where it is I work, and what I do. There's a little bit of a theme of past, present, and future. You might be able to follow along with the storyline. And I also recognize that this is supposed to be a fun event and it's, science in the virtual pub. So I encourage you to take a sip anytime I say conservation or education or something similar like training, capacity, and have a little bit of fun as I sort of give you this overview of who I am and the work that I do. So I like to start with this quote when I give some talks because it's been meaningful to me in my career. It goes, in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. This is a quote that's attributed to Baba Diome in 1968 at the General Assembly of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Baba Diome, who's a Senegalese forest engineer, shared this insight. Now, he said it in 1968. I didn't hear of it until 2002 while I was an undergraduate working in an animal behavior lab and a conservation biology lab. And it was during a time where it was my first experience in independent research. I was studying beluga whales and I was really starting to grapple with all the headlines that were coming out, declines in biodiversity, and I was engaged, and I wanted to be active. I wanted to help. I wanted to learn as much as possible about our natural world, especially a passion of mine, which was animals. So this quote did resonate with me, and it was sort of a turning point for me to start me on a path that really has primarily focused on researching different species and connecting what I've learned to conservation efforts. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about my past in this research endeavor and what this has looked like over the years. So I was really excited to see the world. I had mainly lived in New York State for my life and was excited to get out there and explore new areas and learn new things about species. I'll go through a couple of the studies that I've participated in to give you a little bit of a flavor of what I've done. I would say at this point, the majority of my career has been studying turtles. Didn't start that way, but I've studied New York State turtle species, but I've also had the opportunity to study Burmese star tortoises and radiated tortoises in Madagascar. Things about their health. I've studied movement patterns of turtles and reproductive ecology, nesting ecology of turtles. One of my formative experiences was actually as an undergraduate. I had an opportunity to go to the Costa Rica rainforest and different areas of the country to learn about conservation broadly and the biodiversity there. And then I was tasked with conveying that information through educational materials on a website and through public programming at a local zoo. I worked at the Cape Cod National Seashore monitoring piping plovers and other shorebirds and engaging with the public to talk about the efforts that were ongoing with these species. I worked in the Netherlands at a seal hospital, rehabilitating orphan seals and also studying populations' use of sandbanks in the area, mainly for breeding and um, uh, or mainly for the use of it for offspring and the basking behavior. And I've also studied penguins, little penguins in New Zealand, looking at reproductive ecology of that species. There's others I'm not mentioning, monitoring hippos in Ghana, determining home ranges for jaguars in Belize. I really, as you can see, have had sort of a diversity of different types of species I have worked with, and the sort of unifying thread has been that I've really been trying to understand what is their ecology, and then how can we use that information to better inform management or conservation practices. So another uniform thread, though, that has gone through all of these experiences and beyond is the role of education. I graduated with an undergraduate degree in biological sciences and environmental studies. And when I got out of school, I wasn't exactly sure exactly what I wanted to do with that. I ended up getting a job in museum education. And my mother actually came and watched me one day give a class, and she's like, "This is it. You should do this. This is great." And I was like, "Nah, nah, I don't want to be a teacher. That's not, I don't know what I want to be, but that isn't what I think I'm going for." But um, she was right. And needless to say, over the years, I have just engaged in education in so many different ways. I started with that museum education, teaching science camps, birthday parties, etc. I became a zookeeper and also taught the public and the visitors at the zoo about the species that I cared for. I've done things like content development for websites and advising on videos and children books on topics of nature. I've done many public engagements and also worked in community, working with the public. I taught classes on community gardening and taking care of houseplants at New York City Housing Authority community centers. Um, I've also done, and that's sort of on the informal side of education. On the formal side of education are these like sort of delineations that you hear of. I have worked in higher education, teaching at Fordham University, Barnard College, and Columbia University. I've helped develop curriculum and taught for undergraduate, graduate, professional level, mainly teachers, teaching teachers, and also the public with massive open online courses. And throughout this research experience and these teaching experiences, really mentoring and training the next generation of scientists has been central to what I do. So, what do I do and where am I? I mentioned this in the first slide, but I'm at the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation. And tackling the biodiversity crisis requires transdisciplinary work and transformational change. And I want to explain a little bit about some of the work that's been going on at the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation and take aside from my personal journey in a second. But what we like to say at the CBC is that the CBC transforms knowledge from diverse sources and perspectives and spanning areas of scientific research as well as traditional and local knowledge into conservation action. And one way we try to represent it is through a Venn diagram. So in these sort of spheres that I will bring back up throughout the talk, there's this idea of using evidence and synthesizing evidence, building evidence, and then developing capacity of individuals, organizations that do conservation work in that green sphere, and then really leveraging collaborations for a larger impact. We really try to prioritize co-creation of projects and initiatives and convene and connect diverse groups for sharing and collaborative problem solving. So what does all these words mean in practice? So the evidence, for example, could be applied interdisciplinary research. The capacity could be trainings and mentoring, creating resources, and that collaboration could facilitate convenings and connections. And all of this builds together towards that conservation action that is so important to the work that we do and the outcomes that are needed in order to conserve biodiversity. I have put the link to our website, amnh.org/CBC, because I'm going to touch on some of the things that we do, but there's just so much. For such a small team, we only have about 15 people. We really are doing a wide range of things, and I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about the work we do. I'm going to give you a couple of examples to give you a flavor, though. And I want you just to think about how I talked in the beginning about how I really appreciate the research side of things and also the education side, so you can see the overlap of these types of projects and how it aligns with that. So one thing that our center does is we create software tools. Now, these software tools are used across the globe, empowering others to generate new evidence for local biodiversity in their local region. So for example, we host Maxent software, which is the most popular species distribution modeling software. We also are part of the team that has co-developed Wallace, which is another that leverages the algorithm of Maxent, but a user-friendly GUI that is available to really train people about how to do species distribution modeling appropriately and rigorously. And then there's other software programs like Dot.Goose that helps people count things in images, something so simple, but sometimes a quick and simple tool online can assist with that task. I have a QR code here. I recommend you check out the long list of other types of software tools that we use. And now I'm going to explain how this idea of software tools can be put into this aspect of this Venn diagram. So one example that is not of my work, but from the Associate Director of the CBC, Dr. Mary Blair. So in collaboration with Arctic Indigenous reindeer herders, she and they will use remote sensing and drone data to fill gaps in the scientific and indigenous knowledge systems regarding land degradation. Now, this is all in service of understanding more sustainable pasture and ecosystem management in Norway. And this is a great groundbreaking example of transdisciplinary research because it is including knowledge users or stakeholders as participants in the production of this new knowledge. And to share the approach that she's using, Mary was invited to the International Science Council at the UN to present in July at the high-level political forum on the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN. So this is an example. Mary is a descendant of the Sami people. She works with relatives in this regard and towards this this purpose and this research project. And she's sharing how she's approaching it to a larger community and is using some of these technological tools. And along this line of co-creation, I want to talk a little bit about a project that I've been involved in more locally, and that is working with local partners to answer some pressing questions that they have. So in this picture, I'm sitting with another museum scientist and two folks from the New York City Parks Department. And we are uh, we are actually in the Bronx River. And so Adam Jadав is sitting next to me, and uh, he invited me to come along with him. He's doing a separate project, really understanding small scale fisheries in New York City and the people, how people are using the waterways. And we were invited to go and check out this uh, fish passage. So this fish passage is at a dam in the Bronx River, and it's this dam has been there, I think, since the 1600s. It's an extremely old dam, and not that long ago, a fish passageway, or you might think of it as like a fish ladder, was constructed to allow fish to go up to the top of the dam. And one of the questions they had while we were just sitting there chatting was, it was like, oh, we have all this video of what fish are going through this passageway. It's just really time consuming and labor intensive to watch it and determine what's going by and make sure it's a fish and then identify it. And we wish we had a simpler way to do this. And so let me quickly press play. So in collaboration with software developer Pete Ersts, that's here at the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation, he says, I mean, there's tools out there to do that. Let's work together to make that work. So what you're seeing here is it's a model that he ran just this week. So this is fresh off the presses in some regard. Now it's just a training model. This is a detection model that uses a different data set from the MIT Sea Grants Herring data set. It's a model that was constructed on that data set to basically just identify, is this a fish or not? And basically, as you can see, a bounding box sort of surrounds what it thinks is a fish. And on the right, you'll see there's a confidence level, a number. And basically, from this external data set, using a software tool that is a CBC software tool called Bboxy, um, they were able to determine that basically 85 to 98% of the time, that was the confidence level that we were able to identify that it was a fish rather than something else passing through this camera. Now, again, this is a training data set, a trained model on a different data set. The next step will be to use the data really from the Bronx River to improve this and sort of curate it to the specific need. And then it hopefully will get to the next steps, which will be able to even help identify. That will cut down the work effort extremely a lot for these researchers working with the New York City parks. And another question that came up was, at this dam, they work to move eels, which is a really fascinating species, American eels, from below the dam to above the dam. Not all of them, I think, can use this fish passageway, especially the smaller versions or the smaller eels, the stage of the eels, like the glass eels. And so what they do is they have New York City Parks employees and volunteers go out. They put these eel mops out that you can see in this picture, sort of looks like a massive wig of filament, and they leave it in the water and it serves as a refugia for the eels to stay in. And then they dunk that in a bucket of water and are able to pour the water through a net and see if there is any eels that were hiding in it. Then they transport those eels up the fish ladder and they put it into above the river to allow for the migration upstream. So basically they had a question of, we've been doing this for 10 years. We're trying to assess the successfulness of it, but also we're trying to assess how we can do this better. And so that was something that I worked and mentored some New York City Park staff and an intern to help analyze that data set. And the main takeaways were, about when they should focus their efforts. And they've already changed their protocol this upcoming year to reflect that project, which is great. And the last thing I'll mention on the research side of things is another question that came out of this one field excursion out to the dam, which is, are we just feeding the predatory fish when we bring these eels, these tiny eels up? Because they've noticed that there seem to be some fish just sort of lying in wait, waiting and sort of watching. And they're like, are we just feeding them? What are the predators? What is this system? What are the threats? And is there anything that we should know that might be something we can manage for, like, common carp, or something along those lines? So this summer, I, along with a bunch of colleagues here at the American Museum of Natural History, are hosting two undergraduate students to the NSF-funded REU Research Experiences for Undergraduates program. And we're going to be helping to answer that question. What are these predatory fish in this river above and below the dam eating? And is eels included? So this mentoring experience is going to include the students learning how to collect the fish, how to do stomach content analysis, and using genetic and genomic tools in order to answer this question. And so that gives you a brief, maybe whirlwind insight into a couple small or not necessarily small, but small in comparison to all of the different projects going on in our center that are really in that applied interdisciplinary research. But you'll notice that there's been quite a bit of overlap. The convening and connecting is really all about collaboration, and that's how these studies were designed. And we're working consistently by training and mentoring through these projects. So before I really shift gears to really focus on the education specifically, I do want to highlight a project, or I should say a program that's been going on that really highlights that red sphere of the work we do, which is that convening and connecting. And it highlights the type of work that I do here at the museum. So I am, in my current role, the lead organizer of the Student Conference on Conservation Science, which we abbreviate SCCSNY for short. But this is a international conference, and it's part of an international series of conservation conferences that really feature and center students and early career professionals in conservation. There's one, the original one that's been going on for 25 years or so is SCCS Cambridge. There is one in SCCS Bangalore, but there have been others that have been in Hungary and China and Australia and more. The one here in New York has been going on for the past 16 years, and each year, hundreds of students, mainly graduate and undergraduate, but also early career professionals come. And there's also professionals who are mentors to these students. They come from all over the world, and they come to the museum for a 3-day conference. And ever since 2020, we've also provided a virtual attendance option for this conference. The participants of the conference can present on their work, but some are here to just learn and attend. For those that are presenting, the conference provides opportunities to get feedback from mentors. The conference also has opportunities for professional networking, diverse ways of engaging with science, such as our Artist in Residence programming. And what I really love about it, one of the things, is that participants have the opportunity to learn from each other, connect to their peers, and really get to know the future generation of conservation leaders. These are the people who they will be their future colleagues, and they'll cross paths with throughout their career. The conference also has opportunities for participants to sign up for hands-on workshops, behind-the-scenes tours at the museum. There's plenary talks from inspiring conservation leaders, public popular science events, career panel discussions, happy hours, receptions. And for me, it's one of the highlights of the work that I do, and I work on it year round as one of our convenings. And one of the ways it's so important to me, it's not because it's part of my work, but it's also how I got to where I am to some degree. When I was in graduate school, I attended the first SCCS NY. And so I know I've been talking for a little while, and I feel like people might need a little bit of a stretch break. So I just take a second and look at this photo and see if you can find me. Um, when it was what? It was 16 years ago, so I might look a little different. I'm not wearing glasses. That will be a good tip for you, because eyesight changes when you get older. So while you're looking for me, I just want to reiterate that um, one of the reasons I love this photo is because I look through it and I see all of the people that I did not know then, but now I know very well and are my professional connections. One quick reflection is that a Yale student in this picture, I ended up contacting him over a decade later, saying, I saw your talk, I remember it. I have a student now who wants to do similar research. Would you be willing to mentor them? And he's like, yeah, that's so exciting. And it was just a great moment of reconnection. All right. So if you found me, great. If not, there you go. I'm sort of in the middle there, looking pretty excited. Um, And and with that, I want to refocus on the green area of this Venn diagram and connect the dots a bit. That, for example, the workshops at that Student Conference on Conservation Science are a great example of training events that we provide, and also mentoring at SCCS. But I want to focus the rest of my talk really on um, this capacity side of the Venn diagram, and specifically a capacity program that we have at the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation called the Network of Conservation Educators and Practitioners. So I'm just going to pause to mention what I mean by capacity. Conservation capacity is the ability to meet the environmental challenges we face globally as individual organizations and societies. And what the Network of Conservation Educators and Practitioners does, or NCEP, is improve the practice of biodiversity conservation by improving conservation training, teaching, and learning. So we also have to think about what is taught and how and why is effective, as well as who's included at the table and in the classroom as we work to improve teaching and learning in professional settings and universities. So indulge me, if you will, on a little bit of a storytelling understanding of this network of conservation educators and practitioners. In the early 1990s, as a doctoral students studying nocturnal lemurs, the ii, which you'll see a picture there of, they're pretty neat, it's a pretty neat animal. If you don't know about it, I encourage you to look it up. Dr. Eleanor Sterling was inspired to learn about how environmental science was taught in the country. Madagascar is widely recognized as a global hotspot, and she was interested to know how the folks that lived there were being trained and becoming the next generation of conservation actors. She was discouraged by the lack of resources and that the educators were limited by the type or availability of textbooks. They're often out of date or irrelevant to the local context. And she recognized this need for up-to-date and relevant materials and free, materials for them to use in their teaching the next generation of conservation practitioners. Um, so it really started pulling on some questions about what does the training of next generation of leaders look like? What skills do they need? How will they be effective? And so with colleagues, she developed the network of conservation educators and practitioners and began by creating these educational resources that were freely downloadable and available for use worldwide. She and the NCEP team called them modules. So I'm just going to quickly explain what that means. This could be, for example, a document that's a synthesis document that is sort of a explanatory background document. It could include other things like exercises, case studies, teaching notes, and supplementary files like PowerPoint presentations and data files, for example. Now, this was in 2000 that they started this project, and now, over 25 years later, uh, we have over almost 200 of these educational modules available on our NCEP module collection. ncep.amnh.org is the way you can get to it. And I encourage you to check it out and see the freely downloadable materials that are available in adaptable formats such as Microsoft Word documents, because we recognize that teachers don't teach the same way and should change materials to fit their context. Anyone can download these student-facing materials. They're great for self-guided learning, but if you're an instructor and you're interested in instructor guidance, you do need to register. It's free, but you have to click on that blue hyperlink at the top of the page to gain access to the educator-only materials. Another way that we've packaged these materials is through a more formal publication, and as the leader of now in my current role as the manager of the network of conservation educators and practitioners. I also am the editor-in-chief of this journal. It's called Lessons in Conservation, and it allows for a more traditional publication status of the materials, as well as opportunities for additional article types like editorials and perspectives. And we promote when things come available, just so you're aware, through a webinar series called Lunch and Learns. We actually have our next one coming up. It's a 30-minute short presentation where the authors of recently published material share their resource, uh, and we encourage you to check it out. You can scan that barcode to register. And with that sort of aside about what we're currently doing and something that's around the corner, I just want to get back to that story about NCEP. So this module collection grew and the focus expanded increasingly to include not only what we teach, but also how we teach it. We found that many of our colleagues home and abroad were experts in their field, but they received little or no training on pedagogy and were asked to teach hundreds, even thousands of students over the course of their career. And so NCEP started to broaden what it was that we did and then started to include training. Now, this was training of educators in evidence-based teaching practices. And over this 25 years, we have personally trained over 5,000 educators at NCEP workshops, or what we call studios. And these have different themes on active learning, inclusive teaching, assessment, things that aren't necessarily taught in the curriculum of getting your PhD in conservation biology. Um, I am going to just say here, I'm going to go quickly over this for the sake of time, that there is a wide body of evidence that shows certain things that work in the classroom, and we're consistently or constantly learning more as more studies come out. This is a seminal paper from 2014 meta-analysis that really, encourages the use of active learning in the classrooms versus traditional lecturing. As someone who's doing a traditional lecture right now, I feel very wrong. But I wanted to highlight the example of this scholarship of learning that NCEP started to incorporate into the work that we do. I'm going to skip over this slide quickly and jump to some of the work that we've done. So we actually started to turn the lens back on us and said, are our materials actually having measurable gains in learning, in skill building? And so through a series of different NSF-funded studies, we looked at our materials to see, can we advance critical thinking skills, data analysis skills, oral communication skills, system thinking skills, these skills that are needed to be a successful practitioner in the professional world in conservation. And we had a suite of studies come out based on those different skill building efforts, and I'm not going to have time to talk about all of them and the results, but I have some screenshots here of the titles of those articles if you're interested in learning more. And and with that, I want to just pause and say, I've gone over a lot. I understand there's a lot that I covered, but what I want to end on is really thinking about the future. So I've talked about my past a little bit, how I got to my current role and my interests, and how this current role really marries that ability to do that applied research, but also really focus on the improvement of conservation education. um, but, and I also talked about the history of the program that I manage. But now I want to talk a little bit about the future of the program. And that really is something that is inspiring us right now at NCEP. And I want to pause just for a moment, if you would be so kind, those that are here, to put in the chat, what do you think is important to teach or learn? Are there any emerging topics or skills you don't think are currently taught well or enough in classroom? So I'll give you some time to jot that down if you're willing to add it to the chat. And while you do that, I just want to say that we are going to ask these questions more broadly to the NCEP community that we have built over the past 25 years. We know already from people reaching out that there's a real interest in understanding how AI is going to change what's happening in the classroom, how teachers develop resources and materials, how students learn with the use of AI. What are the best evidence-based approaches for integration? What are the AI skills that are needed and are emerging for conservation professionals that students need to be aware of as they graduate into this field? There's also a really big emphasis on affect, or how are people responding emotionally to the crises of climate change and biodiversity loss? How can we promote resilience in students? Um, so these are some examples of what has already emerged, and we're starting to tackle those, and we really are hopeful to get more responses so it can help direct how the future of NCEP supports the education community. So, talking about education community, that leads me to the next slide, which is about an upcoming event we have this month called our Community Exchange. We're doing this in collaboration with the Society of Conservation Biology North America Education Committee. And this is an opportunity, an online opportunity for educators from all over the world to come together to really talk about what it's like to be teaching climate change, or what it's like to be teaching amidst climate change happening around us. How are our students feeling? How are we feeling? Also, how do we handle these complicated topics that include emotional dimensions? And there's an aspect of how do we learn from our students? How are we listening to them? Do we know what it is they want us to be teaching? And how does that incorporate into this conversation? And so we have a guest speaker who has done some research on this, who will be doing a short presentation. And then it's really about us exchanging and finding support within community. I encourage you, you can sign up again on that QR code, or you can find it on our website. And along this path, we're also having a interactive session at the North American Congress for Conservation and Restoration Conference, which is hosted by the Society for Conservation Biology North America and the Society for Ecological Restoration. And it's in collaboration with professors from the University of Washington and University of California, Irvine. And it's really about how do we build emotional resilience among conservation students. So I encourage you, if you're going to that conference, to check it out. And with that, I wanted to end sort of where I began. And with this quote, I come back to this quote a lot, and I always think about the ways I would edit it or change it based on my experiences in my life. And one of the ways that I think about it now is a little bit less passive, of instead of saying we will understand only what we are taught, rethinking that a bit and expanding it to think about, not just what we are taught, but how we are taught, what we learn ourselves, the experiences we have, our active discoveries and research, the interactions we have. And it's still, this quote though still gives me hope, and it is something that still, I think, grounds the work that I do in both conservation and education. That is the end of my overall talk, but I do want to end with a couple of announcements. I know I've talked about a lot of different initiatives and programs. I'm happy to answer questions. One thing I want to mention, that if you're an educator and you have an educational resource on topics of conservation, feel free to reach out and let us know. It might be something that's relevant to teach, to publish in Lessons in Conservation, which is geared towards the undergraduate and undergraduate, graduate, and professional level learning generally, just for context. Other things, I want to just mention that if you want to learn more about NCEP, please feel free to join our mailing list. You can do the QR code or find us at ncep.amnh.org. And if you want to follow CBC more broadly on LinkedIn to learn more about our ongoing work, please feel free to find us there or scan that QR code. And last but not least, the Student Conference on Conservation Science is going on again this year. It's October 14th through 16th, and it has both on-site at the museum and virtual. And we encourage you to check it out and look it up. And applications to present are now open until April. So please check it out. And with that, I can take questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Suzanne. And I did put the link to info on this year's conference and to register for that upcoming Zoom as well are in the chat. And there are some responses to your question on what should be what's most important to teach.
Great, thank you. I appreciate everyone's response to that.
Yes. And we can look at some of those, but I will first open it up to questions. If anybody wants to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and we will take those as they come. Or you can put them in the chat. And Gustavo asks, "Can I talk with you, doctor, by email?"
Yes, yep. I can put my email in the chat. It's also I think on the AMNH website as available too, but I will put it right here so you can copy and paste it.
Here we go. Other questions? Gustavo is one of our great regulars joining us from Mexico City.
Wonderful.
And Rob has his hand up. So go ahead, Rob.
Okay. So, as you may know, there have been some big changes recently in the future inclusion of climate change education within New York State K-12 curriculum. And I was wondering to what degree there might be a movement that you know of to make sure that conservation is represented in science curricula, I guess, either in the state or across the country.
That's a great question, and right up our alley, and with my colleagues. We are constantly trying to better integrate biodiversity education with climate education because there is such a push towards climate education now, but these are linked crises. And as I continue to have my fingers interwoven, they're linked crises. And so separating them out is not the best approach. And trying to find the best sort of leverage point in order to get biodiversity better incorporated into it has been challenging. We have been thinking about it even on the more institutional level of how here at the American Museum of Natural History, how can we better incorporate biodiversity into our on our programming on climate change? When it comes to a national level or New York State level, We haven't been as active, although that being said, we are currently talking to folks at the Nature Record. If for those who might not be as familiar, the Nature Record is a new assessment of nature in the assessment of nature in the United States that had just come out last week as a draft form. This is an initiative that was initially started under the Biden administration as part of their administration goals, but has been discontinued in this administration. And there was an effort to publicly or and privately fundraise for a continuation of the work that had gotten started in the past administration. And they just released that material. So in collaboration, our group, NCEP, in collaboration with the Society for Conservation Biology North America, are working to think how can we create educational materials surrounding this, and how could that be better integrated into other initiatives possibly in the future, like with climate change education, uh, um, um, sort of policies and initiatives that are happening across the United States. I would say we're at the early stages, and no, we have not heard of as a another sort of movement that is having that groundswell of support to try to better incorporate it um, into policy, education policy. Though maybe this nature record is a sort of a push in that direction.
Other questions?
Can I make a question?
Yes, go ahead, Gustavo.
Well, I understand that you have ecological programs, but I want to ask if this ecological program focus in the different parts of Mexico, in special of Yucatan. In Yucatan, we have a lot of species, not penguins, but we have a lot kind of birds, a lot kind of mammals, in special deers, crocodiles, and give me a minute. And the other bird, well, I cannot pronounce it very well the name, but it is a quetzal. The quetzal is a special bird, but it is not common in this period, in special because the weather, no, the zone or the forest, it is endangered by these birds.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the quetzal. It's one of my favorite birds. And when I was an undergraduate, I when I was in Costa Rica, I was lucky enough to see one because I know they are so rare. Um, so in general, to answer your question about our work in Mexico, at the Center for Biodiversity, we have had many different programs over the years, and have had scientists work in many different regions. When it comes to Mexico, the Network of Conservation Educators and Practitioners, NCEP, the program that I now manage, did have a program in Mexico. I didn't get to really explain this aspect of the work that we used to do, but we when we had scientists working in a specific region, we would also bring NCEP representatives to work with the universities in that area to help develop materials on topics that were locally relevant to them. And then we had a train the trainer sort of approach where there was trainings of the college professors or the instructors or the practitioners, park rangers, etc., who then would go back to their institutions and train their colleagues in these sort of evidence-based teaching practices and the use of the materials that were developed. And we had funding through things like the MacArthur Foundation to do this type of work. We did have a long-standing program in Mexico doing that. It was before I started, but happy to point you in the direction of the resources that did come out of that. And when it comes to any of the CBC, the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation Scientists that have worked in Mexico specifically on applied research, I can't think of any in the past couple of years off the top of my head, but the AMNH, the American Museum of Natural History, definitely has ongoing work with scientists and collaborators in Mexico on topics of biodiversity for sure.
Great. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm going to get them in order here, but one is how ecology and AI can work hand in hand. Or I think there's a can.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a question or if that is a request for what we think we should be talking about in the conservation classroom. Um, but either way, I think that this is a burgeoning field, obviously across all fields are figuring out how AI is going to be integrated into it. I can say though, that I've been made aware of, although have not been able to like fully engage in the directions, all the directions that this work is going. But I do see from the virtual pub a list of upcoming events.
Yes, yes, those.
There are some
Oh,
speakers who would be highly relevant to this question and this topic. But it is something for us to be thinking about. And, my ideas that come to head, because I'm not, besides things like, machine learning, using visual models, the example that I had with that training, imagery, you can use AI to be able to identify species, in monitoring procedures, et cetera, to be able to count objects, some of these software tools, to make predictive models about where species are going to be going with different climate change models more advanced than we currently are doing. I think that it really is something that we can further explore, and I feel like the American Museum of Natural History is a good resource and a good place to sort of convene and bring these leaders and experts together to have these types of conversations. It's a good idea for a panel and for
mhm.
the next student
Yeah, in
conference
the
on
fall, maybe.
conservation
Yeah,
science or
yeah.
a public event. So
Mhm.
thank you for that mention.
Yeah, and I'll say that the last session of the spring on May 14th, let me get back to the description, is on using AI for ecological research, and is a postdoc from the Hein Lab at Cornell. Let me see if I can get myself to the talk description. Um, so that is on May 14th, and it's Dr. Wei-Ling Kong. Um, and the title of the talk is Before the Fall, Can Science and AI Predict Ecological Collapse? I'll put the info in the description in the chat. Um, and I'll note that we at PRI are the outreach component of Andrew Hein, who runs the lab that this postdoc is in. And we've just had, I think, one meeting about their work, but it's super, super fascinating. They showed us in that meeting, which I think will come up in the Science in the Pub talk, that they can produce a model of a school of fish by swimming through it with a GoPro in a coral reef, was what they showed us, with hundreds and hundreds of fish. And you can click on any one of those fish and get a fish eye view of it swimming through the reef, and you can see how they behave when predator fish come into the school. And you can see that some fish, who are all the same species, of course, have different personalities and do different things when the predator fish come in, and in other ways. Another example that they talked about and shared with us is an article that I think was called "Misinformation in Birds," which the example that they talked about was that when you see a murmuration of starlings and they all turn seemingly at once, sometimes they turn the wrong direction because a fish gave them, or a bird rather, gave them the wrong info. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting talk. And 2 weeks from tonight, we also have an AI themed one on teens and AI and how the use of AI is affecting teenagers. And that's with, let me get the right title and such there. That is Allison Herman from the um, uh, Laboratory for Rational Decision Making in the Department of Psychology at Cornell. And the title there again is Fact, Fiction, and the Gist, Helping Teens Navigate the World of AI. So, and I'll put the description of that one in there too. And your registration link will work for any Science in the Virtual Pub event. So lots of interesting connections amongst these three talks. So I'm excited about that. There are more questions in the chat. So
John, before we get to another question, can I just
Mhm.
chime in, just continuation of those thoughts? The two titles brought up something to me. One of which that I haven't mentioned yet, that is an important aspect of AI and ecology, or AI more generally, is the ethical use of it, right? And
Mhm.
that side of the story being part of the story, which often does get sidelined or
Yeah.
not fully integrated. So the ethical use, who is it benefiting, who profits from it, what is the water use, the environmental
Yeah.
use, those sides of things. But also when mentioning, and in the case of this, how people are responding to it, maybe more socially. Um, the other side of it that stems some curiosity for me on, predicting ecological collapse or decline. I'm also, interested to hear how AI is going to do
Mhm.
future visioning and preventing collapse, or in, predicting the viable solutions and things along those lines. So I think, there's definitely positives and negatives through these conversations that are bound to arise and should be part of curricula.
Yeah, and another just bit of AI stuff is Tuesday night we did a session that was not Science in the Virtual Pub, but on what I'd teach about um, if I only had an hour, what would I teach about climate change? And while we did not request this, I got a notification from webinar TV.us that they have created a page of it with the talk broken down into chapters and a podcast made from the talk with these two AI personalities talking about the content of the talk. And it's free, but it's weird. And I'm not quite sure what to make of it. But in many ways, it looks great, but it kind of freaks me out at the same time. So that's free associating on AI, which is maybe not where we should go right now. Um, but I put the link there in the chat for anybody who's interested in looking at that. Um, so uh, there are, like I said, a couple more questions in the chat. Let me see if I can find them. So well, this is a response to your question of what's most important in teaching about conservation and personal conservation efforts that can be made at all ages. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is something that comes up all the time, and although it isn't my area of expertise, and in the question itself of what is the collaborative effect of these decisions, of a communal effect, I do want to, I'll put in the chat to point out a resource that we compiled about some of these small actions. Um, about what it is you can do personally on our website. When it comes to the data that sort of reinforces these decisions or measures the cumulative impact of it. I'm not as familiar with that, but I would love to know, and so it's a good reading list for me to like circle back to, and think about how do we integrate both the what you can do and the agency aspect in the classroom and really make sure that there isn't just doom and gloom, and this idea of resilience and agency I think is extremely important in the classroom. And so for me on our to-do list is to create more materials that foster those um, experiences and understandings. I can say that we, in our last issues of Lessons in Conservation, although not necessarily linked to climate change, there is a reflection, a perspective piece about incorporating kindness in your classroom and how, in a course that is heavily focused on these sort of intense topics of and heartbreaking topics, how small moments of inclusion of kindness in local communities can uplift the spirit and the mood of the class, and also give people a sense of hope that might not have been an action towards reducing climate change or conserving biodiversity necessarily, but have bled into a feeling that can lead to more actions in the future. So that is in our most recent Lessons in Conservation about random acts of kindness is an example that I would like to point out.
Yeah, and very complimentary to some of the discussion in Tuesday night session. But I do think that some level of doom and gloom actually has merit because we won't do anything if we're not scared about it. But you can't just have doom and gloom, or you can't have doom and gloom be the overwhelming piece of it. But getting to work on the problem and ideally in community with others is the best way to deal with any kind of negative emotion. So, um, and related to that, I see a question because things seem so dire now. How can helping out in small ways to conserve help out with the bigger picture? So I think
That's sort of the one I was referring to, yeah.
yeah. Um, and there's another in general science, students have the biggest challenge with how to interpret data as results and how to use the results as evidence to generate scientific arguments. And that's more of a comment than a question, I think.
Yeah, I do want to say in that regard when it comes to data analysis and general science students, one of our studies did look how to improve in one semester. How can you improve data analysis skills? And there was an intervention. And so the way the study was set up was everyone did an case study based exercise that included data analysis in the beginning of it, and a similar one in the beginning of the semester and a similar one at the end. And the variance was there was an intervention for half the classes, that there was an opportunity to engage meaningfully in a reflective way. I think I can't remember with this study if it included peer interaction, but uh, another sort of approach of how you broke down that type of activity was the intervention between, and there was measurable increases for those that were in the sort of test group of that intervention comparatively to those who just did the before and after without that intervention. And so one of those studies, and I'm happy I can pull up the actual like link to the event, but the data analysis one goes over the results of that study, and I could also yeah. So um, there are some techniques to help with data analysis improvement, even in one semester of a general science class. Um, I also saw a comment or a request, maybe it was from you, Don, about examples of how biodiversity is impacted by climate change.
Yeah, that was me.
And I want to highlight one of our resources, which is called Observed Impacts of Climate Change on Biodiversity. And it is a case study that was updated a few years back to really show examples of the different sort of ways that biodiversity is impacted, and real life studies and examples that demonstrate those ways. And so I've put the link in the chat as a good reference point for that.
Very cool. Other questions? Well, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed tonight, and thanks to all who joined in. And for those who want to return, we'll see you in a couple of weeks to learn about teens and AI. Great talk.
Thank you, Don.
Mm.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. It's been
Mhm.
fun.
All
Thank you,
right.
Suzanne.
Thank you, Robert.
Have a good night, all. And I'm going to click the end button unless anybody has anything else to say. All right. Good night, all.